Good morning and welcome to another Torah class. We study today from the book Selections from Lekutei Sichot, Masei 2. So just a short introduction. This week we combine two portions. It's the last two portions of the book of Numbers, and they are Matot Masei. We will be speaking about the section of Masei today, concentrating on that. The word Masei translates in English into the word journey or journeys. And the Torah, before they enter in the Holy Land, this is the 40th year right now, and we're completing the journey because next week we're going to begin the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is called the Mishnah Torah, a repetition of the Torah, because it's a long speech where Moshe reminds the Jewish people of the commandments and of their misbehaving and the consequences for not listening. So nothing new. Seemingly, there will be many new laws coming up in the book of Deuteronomy, but there will be no new journey, no movement. It is just few months before Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. So Mishnah Torah is unique from the other four in which Moshe is speaking to the Jewish people. It is a speech that he's giving them. Right now, we read about a summary of the journeys. That's the beginning of the second portion, Masei. And how many journeys anyone knows the Jewish people went through the desert? 42. 42. So in 40 years' time, they traveled and they encamped in 42 places. Some places they stayed only for a night. Some places they stayed for 6 months, a year. There was one place, I believe, that they encamped for 19 years. They had no idea what's happening tomorrow. There was a cloud hanging over the tent of meeting, the holy temple, or the tabernacle. And as soon as the cloud was lifted, they knew it's time to pack up and move. And within a couple of hours, they had to start moving around. So they were like what we know today, the Bedouins. They live nomad land, people who lived in temporary dwellings, in huts, in tents. And as soon as there is a order to move, they had to be ready to move. You can't just say, well, I have a dentist appointment in a week, so I have to, postpone and do it another time. We will be dealing with the reason for why Moshe is reminding the Jewish people about their journeys. For what purpose do I need to know the names and the places that the Jewish people had lived in during their journey in the desert? And we will discover a very unique Kabbalistic understanding to a simple text in the Torah. I begin reading. This is a quite long talk of the Rebbe or teaching. So some of it I will summarize instead of reading from the text. When discussing the record of the journeys of the Jewish people through the desert that begins the Torah reading of the present week, the Medrash cited by Rashi in his commentary on the Torah states, when we begin the journey, these are the journeys of the Jewish people during the time they lived in the desert. The Medrash and Rashi brings down the following. To describe the matter by analogy, let's have an analogy to explain why do we need to know all their encampments. It is like a king whose son became ill, and he took him to another place to be healed. On the way back, the father began enumerating all the stages of the journey and told them, here we slept, here we cooled off, here we had a headache. So, I'm sorry, here you had a headache. So the Medrash tells us the following, and Rashi is bringing down this Medrash, that it's like a king who traveled with his son to a special doctor to heal the son because he got sick. On the way back home, as they are going back the same route, he says, remember here, you got cooled down, here we slept. He's pointing out certain markings or to remind certain memories of the past. Why? We will find out. In the same way, the Medrash continue, the Holy One, blessed be He, told Moshe, enumerate for them all the places where they angered me. Therefore, it is said, these are the journeys of the children of Israel. The beginning of our Torah portion begins with these are the journeys of the Jewish people. God tells Moshe, remind them about the places where they angered me, where they slept, where they had a headache, where they were cooled down. So you bring it back. Why? The answer is so they learn from their past not to repeat their misbehaving. Clarification is necessary. The Rebbe is asking 4 questions. Soon the Rebbe will come up with 3 more questions.
Rabbi, it says all the places that they angered me. So he didn't remind them of the places where they felt good or they were blessed.
Okay.
It's only the places that
Good
they
point.
angered him.
Not every place they angered God, right?
Right.
That's the point you're making.
Yeah.
Right. But as soon as you are starting to mention, you have to include all of them. That's the way I understand.
Oh, okay.
Even the places that they were pleasing to God. Okay? A. First question. When the Midrash employs an analogy, it is extremely precise. It's not just because that's the best one, the closest one they can come up with. It must be connected to the story of the journeys in the small, the T and the dots. All of it has to be perfectly matching. Accordingly, it is necessary to say that not only the overall concept conveyed by the analogy that the king's son was ill and he took him to be healed is appropriate to the analogy, but the relationship between God and the Jewish people, but also the particulars it mentions must have fitting parallels. Where do we find counterparts to the 3 incidents mentioned in the analogy? Here we slept, here we cooled off, here you had a headache, in the journeys of the Jewish people. Says Rabbi, when the Medrash brings an analogy, it's not like me and you when we talk and I'm trying to convey a message and give you an analogy that is not precise, that it matches only one aspect. It's every detail. In other words, if the Medrash tells us that the Jewish people got sick and they needed to be cured, we understand that. So God took them out from a sick place to be cured in the Holy Land. Okay, but he's bringing 3 examples. Slept, cooled off, and a headache. In where were journeys where they stopped, that they needed to cool off, that they needed to sleep, that they needed to that they had a headache. B. Furthermore, from the fact that the Medrash mentions only these 3 incidents and does not even add the phrase v'chulei, etc., it is apparent that these 3 examples are not only appropriate for the 3 elements of the analogy, but also serve as a description of the state of the Jewish people throughout their journeys as a whole. In other words, the 3 refers to phrases found in all 42 journeys. The fact that they are bringing 3 examples, sleeping, cooling, and headache, is not just for 3 out of 42, but actually it is applicable to every single one of the 42.
42 stops.
42 encampments, yes. Number 3. So we need to understand the connection. So the first question is, everything is precise. Where are those 3? Number 2, if he's bringing only 3 and he doesn't say v'chulu in Hebrew is a word that mentions that intended to say etc. and there is other. It means that these are the only 3 that can be applied to every one in 42. Number C, the third question. We can grasp why here you had a headache, and even here we were cold. Are analogous to places where they angered me, since they involve sickness and discomfort. In other words, the analogy between cooled off or had a headache refers to misbehaving or making the wrong choices, since they involve sickness and discomfort. However, how is "we slept" an analogy for the places where they angered me? How is slept something that would provoke the king's anger? Number 3, asked the Rabbi. The Medrash brings three examples. One of them is slept. Sleeping is nothing wrong. Sleeping is something God created us with, and we need to sleep to live a good life. So if you bring in cool down, you got a cold. If you bring in headache, it's an analogy to making the wrong choices, to not feeling good, to not having a good relationship with God. But when you say you slept here, how is that a reminder of something not good? The first 2 examples cited by the Medrash are stated in the first person plural. We slept, we cooled off, including also the king. However, the third example, you had a headache, is stated in the singular and refers only to the king's son. How are all these elements applicable to the analogy, in the analogy? Says Rabbi, that's a 4th question. If you look at the Medrash says, when they journey back, the king reminds the prince of their past journey, and he says, here we cooled off. Here we slept. But here you had a headache. What do you mean you had a headache? We had a headache. We cooled. We slept. You. Suddenly it's singular. We need to understand that. So the Rebbe is asking 4 questions. The first is, it is very precise when the Medrash and Rashi brings down analogy. Therefore, when citing 3 examples of, so to say, negativity, we need to know to which journeys in specific the Medrash is referring to. Number 2, if you say no, etc., it must be that those 3 examples are applicable not only to 3 specific ones, but the entire 42. And number 3, what's wrong with we slept? We slept is not negative. Number 4, why, when we talk about a headache, you had a headache, and excludes the king, excludes God. Here is the Rebbe's answer. I'm going to share with you the summary because I want to get to the essence, because it's so deep and there is so many gems in the Rebbe's talk. It's just an amazing explanation. The Rebbe says that if you look in the history of Jewish people, prior to their the splitting of the sea, crossing the desert into the desert, there were 3 encampments. One is called Ramses, the second one is called Sukkot, and the third one is called crossing the sea. They were encamped on the Sea of Reeds until the Egyptians were behind them and they didn't know, they got lost. Says Rabbi, that's what the Medrash is referring to. Why? Because the desert is a no man's land. You have a journey into the desert. So it's kind of in between living Egypt and going into the desert. That's the first journey. If you read in the text, you discover that when they left Egypt, they stayed in Ramses. The Torah describes in the text, and they stayed there overnight. After that, so that's the first thing, we slept there. They slept overnight. Then from Ramses, they went to Sukkot. Sukkot is a name. Why did they name it Sukkot? Because God brought down the clouds to cool them down, to protect them from the sun, the elements of the sun, of the heat. Up to that point, there was no such thing. So that refers to...
That's the,
Sukkot refers to the clouds that protected the Jewish people. That's why we say a sukkah is a shed, a hut, a protection from the sun.
Okay.
That's why we have Sukkot.
Okay.
That's why, because God created the clouds to protect the Jewish people from the sun.
Okay.
So the first time they experienced that was in the second encampment. which that's why they name it Sukkot. It's not a place, it's a event that God brought the cloud to protect them. Therefore, that's the place where we cool down. What happened in the third place? They came to Yam Suf, they lost it. They were ready to go back. They said, Nitna Rosh v'nashuva Mitzrayim. Let's go back to Egypt. That's called a headache. That's called.
You got a headache.
Huh?
That's the example for you got a headache.
So you got a headache. And that's why you and not God, because now the first time they go outside of God's realm or boundaries, and they want to rebel against God. So again, it's not necessarily negative. This is the first step. There is many steps into these answers, but we need to understand. First answer, says the Rebbe, when they left Egypt, they came to a place called Ramses. That's the place they stayed. They slept overnight. They were still in the boundaries of Egypt. They were outside Egypt, but they were still in there. They were outside the desert. The second day, they were hot. They were very, very hot under the sun. So God brought the clouds. That's why they named the place Sukkot. That's a place they cooled down. The third one, they had a headache, is when they came to Egypt, they came to the Sea of Reeds, and they didn't know what to do, and they said, let us return back. That's called having a headache. Your mindset is not clear. You don't even see the future. You only see the problem, and you want to avoid the blessings that's before you. That's why it answers the first question, one of the questions. How come it's singular when it comes to having a headache? We slept, we cooled down, but when it comes to the headache, it's you had a headache, because the king was not part of that behavior. So far, so good? Yeah. Then the Rebbe is addressing the next point. The next point is that those three are a representative of the remaining 39. In other words,
what's the 42?
It's a total 42 between leaving Egypt and entering the Holy Land. That's the beginning of this week's portion. Now we're going to have 39 more. Says the Rebbe, in the entire 39, they are going to experience any one of those three. They are the fathers, the first three, that will influence the remaining 39. Why is it so important for me, says the Rebbe? Because it's a representative of the journey that we go through for the arrival of Mashiach. We are told that just like you left Egypt, so you will be able to expect Mashiach to arrive and take us into the Holy Land. In other words, the story that appears in the Torah, the main theme of most of the books, which is about the journey from Egypt to the Holy Land, is the journey that we go through in exile towards Mashiach. And therefore, all three, slept, cool down, and headaches, are the behavior that we are experiencing in order for us to have Mashiach revealed to himself to us. And therefore the Torah Masei begins with those three. The Medrash brings three examples because they are the fathers and mothers, the parents of what will happen to them in the desert, as well as the story of the Jewish people for the thousands of years in exile. This is in essence. Now we're going to go into more detail, so the Rebbe will address many more questions. Are we clear so far?
Yeah.
Let's go. Here, let's see this. The comparison between journeying from Egypt to Israel is a parallel to the journey of the Jewish people in exile towards the coming of Mashiach. Israel in spirituality or in the future refers to the arrival of Mashiach. I'm reading on page 560. It is written, as in the days of your exodus from the land of Egypt, I will show the people wonders. That's what we read in Micha. Chassidut interprets that verse as implying that the power of the future redemption is derived from the exodus from Egypt. It follows that evil was also nullified at the time of the exodus. Moreover, its partial nullification then generated the potential for its complete nullification in the ultimate future when I'll remove the spirit of impurity from the earth. This motif was overtly revealed at the time of the splitting of the Sea of Reeds, when Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. It was then that the Jews witnessed the nullification and demise of the forces of evil with their own eyes. They saw the Egyptians. Egyptians represent to evil, and they were dead on the seashore. That refers, it can be said that this is why the Medrash alludes to the first three journeys of the Jewish people, which transpired before the splitting of the sea. These journeys brought about a state equivalent to the nullification and cessation of impurity to be achieved by the 42 journeys through the desert of nations until the Jordan across from Jericho, which alludes to the end of exile as a whole, as explained above. In other words, the Rebbe says, what happened on the Sea of Reeds after the miracle of the split of the sea, a great miracle that the entire universe witnessed? They saw the Egyptians coming out of the ocean as dead bodies. In other words, they saw the evil forces completely annihilated. Now they have no more fear. They will never fear the Egyptians anymore. They will want to return back, unfortunately. But and other bad things. But the fear of Egypt does not exist anymore. In a miniature way, says the Rebbe, it represents the ultimate redemption. So therefore, the first three are the most powerful, and they are the catalyst for the future, not just the 42, the entire 42 encampments in the desert, but also in the future time, the era where Mashiach will arrive. And therefore, because splitting of the sea is the demise of the evil forces. Coming of Mashiach is the demise of the evil inclination. Now, here are two more questions the Rebbe is going to ask. The first question the Rebbe is going to ask is the following. I'm reading page 562. Explanation is necessary. As mentioned initially, the Medrash clarifies that the Torah mentions these journeys to enumerate all the places where they angered me. However, among the 42 journeys, there are numerous places where this rationale does not appear relevant. On the surface, the Jews did not arouse divine anger during many of these journeys, as Roger has asked correctly. What do you mean? These are the journeys, and the Medrash says, remind them about the places they angered me. Here you slept, here you had a headache, here we had cooled down. But not every place was anger. There were some encampments in front of Mount Sinai. There were some places where they behaved. They were good boys and girls. So why does the Torah says, Eile Masei, these are the journeys, meaning all-inclusive. Every journey, every encampment was a negative outcome. It's not true. B, in the analogy, the king enumerates all the stages of the journeys on the way back. Furthermore, the wording in the Medrash, he told him here, implies that the statement was made while returning, when they stopped at the very same place. Thus, the Medrash quotes the king as saying, here we slept, here. Clarification is necessary. In the analogy, what is implied by on the way back? The Jews did not retrace their journeys. On the contrary, they continued proceeding forward, advancing closer towards Israel. A simple question that we ask. What happened in the analogy? It took the sign to be cured. Now they're going back to the palace. And on the way back to the palace, says, oh, remember this highway? Here we got stuck because you got cold. Here we had to go to a rest area because you had to go to the bathroom. Here we had to stay to check into our Holiday Inn to sleep overnight. But that's not the case, says the Rebbe. In the analogy, they never retraced back their journeys. They continued on one way. There was no two-way. There was no returning. How come the Medrash is talking about here, here? And the Medrash says here, not reminding them about events that took place 10 years ago, 20 years. Let me go back memory lane, and let's start remembering, or let's trace back our journeys. That's not the case. He says here and here, kan yashanu, kan means over here, pointing out that's the place. Says the Rebbe that in the reality, in the story, this never happened. So the Rebbe is asking two questions, right? Two new questions. One is, how can you say that all the journeys, they angered me? It's not the case. And question two, he's saying to them, here, 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 as if they're going back on their journeys, and it didn't happen.
So the answer?
Here is the way the Rebbe answers that. The Rebbe goes into a very deep Hasidic thought. The Rebbe explained that there are two types of journeys in which God sends human to the earth. There is one type of journey, aside from the obvious, where it's all a blessing, it's all good. In other words, God says, study Torah, keep Shabbat, keep kosher, and we do it. No, that's great. We follow a journey. God's created a pathway for us, and we follow that journey. That's what the journey is. You take a GPS, it says to you, go on I-75, you go on I-75. Take this street, turn right, turn left, you do it. The problem is when things don't work out as planned. What happened if things did not follow the system that we are told is the system that leads us toward our end goal, the end of our life? There are two types of mess up. Mess up, I say in quotation, because as we'll discover, it's God's journey. One is that we mess up, and one that God messes up. For example, God says, keep Shabbat, and he drops me off in the desert that it is impossible to keep Shabbat. God says, keep kosher, and I live in a town. It's impossible to find kosher food. God said, study Torah. I don't have the books. I speak only English. I live in a town. When I moved to town, by the way, there was very few books translated into English. And therefore, you couldn't more than Chumash. People who wanted to study commentary to the Torah, there wasn't, unless they learned to read Hebrew and to speak Hebrew. Speaking Hebrew without practicing does not work. You can read Hebrew, but to understand what you're saying, if you don't practice, you lose it. It's a matter of fact. Now, they couldn't. So in other words, what happened when we go to this desert? You know what desert means? Desert is no man's land, a place where a man don't belong. The beasts, snakes, scorpions live there. We don't belong there. That's what the 42 journeys refer to. The times where either we messed up or that God messed up the system. In other words, I said, someone who became observant, he wants to study Torah, to learn the Torah portion, and he can't because he don't speak English, Hebrew. How many Jews live in Arab country, in China, in Far East, in India, where today you have Google Translator, but on Shabbat you can do it. How many of us cannot pray in a minyan because we have obligations to family or to workplace? How many people of us cannot keep Shabbat, cannot keep kosher, even if we try? So that's one type of thrown into the desert. You dropped off with a parachute from a plane, and you're stuck, and you don't know what to do. Another way of messing up the journey is my choice. Okay. My choice was to live a lifestyle that's not conducive to God's desire. Says the Rebbe, even the journeys where we mess up, it's part of God's plan. We don't mess up God's plan. However, our choice is what God is going to exact an accounting for. So when I make a choice to not pray, God forbid, or when I make a choice not to keep kosher, don't think that at this point you went against God. It was God's plan, it was God's desire, and God made it planted in your head because he knew that you will make that choice. So therefore, he wanted it to be this way. Am I going to be punished? Give an account? Of course, because I did a free choice. You know what a free choice? God did not push me in any direction. But to say that this is not God's desire or God's part of the master plan is totally unacceptable. So again, we have two journeys, Ali. I want to make sure we understand. Going into the desert represent when things don't go according to the plan. How many times things don't go according to the plans? Can we say that there is majority of time things did not work out? Well, if you cognitive, if you pay attention to your life, you'll discover that in most cases, at the end of the day, we end up very happy. But at the journey, the process is always messed up. Now, some of that is my messing up. Some of it is God, so to say, messing up. In other words, God, I tracht und God lacht. Amen. Think and God is laughing because he's having fun of your plans. God has plans for me. He wants me to keep kosher. He wants me to be kind and not to get angry, not to be addicted. And God wants me to wake up on time to bed minion. And we laugh. We're lazy. So far, so good.
Yeah.
Says the Rebbe, this is what the encampments refer to. Now, when they are going back, remember the Rebbe is asking a question. How can you say going back? Remember the question? Leon, remember the question? In the analogy, they got sick, and now they are going back, and the king is pointing out here, here, here. Says the Rebbe, that is what going back means. It refers to the spiritual journey of each one of us. You read about the first time going through the 42, and now we are going back through them. In our life, every person in exile, we're going through. In other words, you take the first 3 and you expand them to the other 42 of in the desert, or 39. And God says, now, here you got cooled down, here you slept, here you had a headache, you, whatever, to remind us about our journey in our life that is a reflection of the exact same journeys the Jewish people went through in the desert. And they are to remind us that God carries us with him. That when the time comes to sleep, we slept. When we needed to cool down, we cool down. When we have a headache, what is a headache? Making the wrong choices. It's not me, even though I'm there, but I did not have a headache. Yes.
The fact that says that the Jewish people never went back physically, weren't they going around in circles?
They went around, yes, you're pointing out that they went around about instead of a very straightforward journey that will take only 3 days. But they weren't going back. There was a place they went back 7 journeys, but that's a different story, not for now.
Okay.
But in general, they went through 42 encampments, and each one of them was getting them closer to the Holy Land. When Aaron died, and this is this week's portion, by the way, next week, the 1st of Av is the Yortzeit, is their fasting anniversary of Aaron. That's why I read about it this week. They ran back 7 journeys. And some tribes and the other tribes came back, and they had a war. Many families died, and they brought them back. But in total, towards closer to the Holy Land, instead of going straight to the Holy Land, cutting through the desert, they went around and about. So it took 42 journeys. By the way, the 29 of Tammuz, the day before Aaron, is the Yortzeit of Rashi, and we study Rashi now. Let's go back to our discussion. Says the Rebbe, that when Mashiach will arrive, the prophet tells us, we will turn to God and say, Odcha Hashem ki anafta bi. Thank you, God, for putting me in a very difficult situation. In other words, you have at times when God, as I said, God gave us a test that it's impossible to overcome. God is giving us a possibility, a situation that there is no way we can serve him. You know, many times I wanted to study Torah, but my child was up all night, and I turned to God and says, how can I concentrate on my prayer as I should? It's impossible. I'm a human being, and I'm confined to my limitations. When Mashiach will arrive, we'll turn back to God and realize that all that was part and parcel of the building of our personality, part and parcel of relating to God. And therefore, even if today the journey is not a good one, in other words, some journeys are blessing, some journeys are angering God. Here you cool down, referring to cooling down from God. Here you had a headache. You had a headache, not me. So the first two is God's partnering. The third one is my own, right? Remember, it's a singular.
Mhm.
Because most 2/3, there are three examples, they have to be precise. 2/3 of the time is God making it. God is taking away the energy from me. God is putting me in a place it's impossible to do what I want. I promised to give $1 million. I had $1 million in the bank to give it to tzedakah. And then somebody, God forbid, identity theft, and it's gone. I turn to God and says, I don't understand. I want to do good. God will make our life is to face such challenges that would be impossible to serve God. Or sometimes we will make it impossible. We will make the wrong choice. When the time comes and we go back to the Holy Land, we can look back at that and say, this was all for a good purpose. And that's why you revisit the places. Revisit the places, meaning look at it from a whole different perspective. Now you don't see it as negativity that distant you from God, but actually a stepping stone, another step in coming closer to the relationship. Did you guys understand that? Says the Rebbe, that's why Rashi and the Medrash is alluding to the prince was sick and he had to be taken to a doctor. You know what's the purpose of the journeys? It's because we are sick. Spiritually, the soul was sent here and totally separated from God. And God says, you know what's the purpose? The purpose is to make the soul closer to God than ever before. The idea of getting was sick, the journeys, during the journeys until we reach the doctor, we are very, very sick. In other words, the behavior is not a good behavior. But the reason we go through those journeys is for what? To see the doctor, so you can go back, revisit all the journeys and say they were a stepping stone in getting closer to be healed. Getting healed refer to Mashiach and purifying the universe. The stepping stones, the steps, some of them were very bad outcome. We got a golden calf, you had spies, you had, where is water? Give me water. And is manna not good enough? There is a lot of mitonenim, apilim. There is many, many times that they angered God. That's what it refers to the first three as the fathers. Remember I told you? As an example, cool down, sleeping, or a headache. A headache is only us, but cool down and sleeping is God participating because part of the plan, so we can be awakened and reconnect to God. Here is what I'm going to show. We're getting to it. It follows page 567. It follows that from the outset, even the descent undergone by an individual Jew and the Jewish people as a whole, as a result of their own choice, are motivated by a divine intent, that through teshuvah for sin, the superior quality of light will come specifically from the darkness, that is, from transforming one's intentional sins into merit. In other words, you take the negative cool down and return it and turn it back. So it becomes a far greater bond to God and elevating the person. The Torah tells us that's why our sages tell us. I'm in the second paragraph, page 568. Our sages state, had Israel been worthy, immediately after they lifted their feet from the sea, they would have entered Eretz Israel. The implication is that the journeys after the crossing of the sea came as a result of the Jews being judged as unworthy, as lacking merit because of their sins. By contrast, the journeys before the splitting of the sea would have been necessary even had the Jews been worthy. The Medrash tells us that had the Jewish people been very worthy, not complaining, then as moment as their feet lifted off the Sea of Reeds, miraculously they would have ended up in Jerusalem, in the Holy Land. But because of the first three journeys that they slept and they got cooled down and they had a headache, they had to go through the desert. What's the purpose of the desert? It's a no man's land to correct everything and reconnect them to God. So some of them were very negative, some of them were very positive. In other words, the Rebbe is going to apply that in our life, therefore, we have to go through the desert before Mashiach will arrive. Desert is no man's land, where sometimes you encounter a natural challenge, a scorpion, a snake, a dry piece of a rock that you cannot cross. Sometimes it's our own doing. We go astray. We go in the wrong way. We decide to go away from the source of water. But all that, when the time comes when Mashiach will arrive, after we get cured by the doctor, we will go back to revisit those places and realize they were all part and parcel of the journey to bring us to the place. Now, says the Rebbe, that's why the idea of the prince became sick. He got sick, so he can go to be cured by the doctor. The doctor is Mashiach. Who makes the kid sick? The prince, the Jew, sick? God. Why did he create that? Why did he put the child in such a challenge? So that the child goes through those journeys and ultimately get cured by the king. In other words, at the child not being sick, you would have never reached the doctor to cure him. Mashiach is a doctor. And therefore, this is part and parcel. So to summarize, what we learn from here is that whenever we have our life is a journey. It's all Masei. It's journeys in which we are hoping to reach closer to Mashiach, to the ultimate times. In order for us to understand that, we need to realize that there are three kinds of journeys. There is one journey that everything is great. You have a beautiful house, a beautiful spouse, you have children, and that's great. Then you have two other part of encampments in our journey. One is where we mess up, we had a headache, we disengage from God. And the other one is when God created that point of slipping, meaning the relationship between us and God don't exist, despite our willingness. We want to, but it's not in our power. All that is part of the ultimate goal to reach closer and create a stronger bond with God so that Mashiach, the doctor, can cure us. And that's the end of this week's portion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shabbat Shalom.
Devar next week.